Hello and welcome to this mini series that I am starting to put together, focusing on Unreal Engine's um, built-in modeling tools. Do they compare with softwares such as Blender, Maya? Probably not, but they allow you to basically do quite a lot. Um, you can use them for grey boxing, as you can see what we're doing here, which is kind of, a sort of pre-design phase. So I suggest to look up some grey boxing and why you do it. But it's basically level design, essentially, before you go full detail. And of course, you can use it, the modeling tools I mean, to make full assets all within Unreal Engine. So that is basically the purpose of it. How do we turn it on? First thing you would need to do is to go to your plugins and look up modeling. This will show you the modeling tools editor mode plugin that you would need to tick on and then probably restart your engine. Once you've restarted the engine, you can come back in to your scene, and up in the top left you'll see that you have a new modeling option here in the drop down. Um, So you can obviously, as it says here, use Shift 5 to activate the mode, or you can just click on this to do it like that. Um, so for this video, we are going to focus purely on the Create tab, and each video will then move on to each one of these to show you what's going on. Potentially these will stay relevant as versions go on, and if there are any other tools added in future versions, I'll do a refresher video. Um, One thing I recommend if you are modeling anything that's important to your game is to always have a character reference. This is kind of nothing to do with the modeling tools other than the fact that I believe it's pretty important to focus on perspective and scale when you are doing any kind of modeling. Otherwise things start to get out of hand. That's something that experience kind of only uh, shows you, and I just recommend from the start cut that corner and always have the mannequin inside with you to sort of get a good reference for scale. Because things become, if I just, as a little tangent, if I take us out here to the rest of the land, you spend some time flying around and suddenly the scale of things becomes a bit obscure and blurred, and I personally find it very difficult to get a sense of scale here. So if I was just to go and start modeling on this part, I might make the buildings way too big, way too small. It just might not make sense. So just having this guy, um, you know, to get a good kind of sense for scale is very handy. So without further ado, let's go through the Create panel. So the first tool we will look at is the Create New Box Objects. Now if we click on that and we have our mouse over into the editor viewport, we can see that we have a cube here. We have these settings which you can edit, of course, but it gets a bit, just like hard to see. So just so you know that you can click once and essentially move around freely around the object still, and then you are able to make changes basically before you commit the object. Once you create the box, by hitting this accept button, basically that will bake in these settings, and then you won't be able to make these kinds of adjustments again. Basically, you can obviously cancel, which will completely take you out of it, but that is that part. You have some basic transform controls here, which essentially are the same as the gizmo. Position, rotation, um, such things like that. So those are the basics. Then if we come up to here, I will skip this for a second and come back to it at the end. But we'll look at shape. Essentially, it's just very simple width, depth, height options. We have width subdivisions, which are currently not visible. Um, I believe there is a way to show it, but I actually can't remember. I'll be honest. Maybe it's visible in wireframe. Yep. So if we come into wireframe mode, we can see here we have our subdivisions, which is basically the detail that makes up the object. So perhaps you want, 6, 6, 6, which is probably a naughty thing to do, but that'll give you that amount of subdivisions detail essentially that you can then play with later on in modeling. But I'm just going to keep it to the default cube, come out of wireframe so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so polygroup mode. I believe this is to do with some of the other menus. So I would basically say let's not worry about those for now. For the positioning part of this, I thought I would show you in the base scene because it's a bit cleaner and a bit easier to see these tools or these three options. So target position is basically how the shape is placed in the scene. Currently we are on scene, which means that any object we're about to place will utilize any of the things within the scene, such as static meshes, to determine its placement. So as we can see, as we go here, it's starting to angle, it's starting to angle the cube, and up here we can place it up there, and you can see it is affected by whatever you try to put it onto, really. Then our other option is ground plane. Seemingly the same, but what this uses is it's based on the grid. So when we try to put it here, you can see it just goes straight through, and it's just sticking to this grid that we have here. I believe that's accurate. Yeah, so that's kind of what's happening there with ground plane. And then the next one is at origin, which means this world origin 0 position will be where the object is placed, and that's basically that one. So if I return to on scene, we'll just quickly explore the others, such as pivot location. Currently we're on the base, so it tries to figure out what the base of the object is and uses that as its connection point for placement. If we change it to centered, it then does the same but for the center of the model or the asset shape, and basically does the same but treats the center point as the connective point. Then top, as I'm sure you can guess, it uses the top of the object to place all quite obvious stuff. And then we have, if I bring it back to base, we have a rotation option, but I'm going to cancel that because it doesn't really allow us to see it. So if I put this at like a 45-degree, it's basically just determining a an angle rotation. And then align to normal is that effect that we saw where it was using the normal face or the angle of the target asset to determine the position rotation of the asset that you're trying to place. So, sorry, that sounds a bit convoluted or complicated way of saying it, but yeah, essentially it aligns the object to the normal. If you turn it off, it will just keep the orientation of the object. And that's basically that part. Please also remember that if you want to talk with me directly, you can jump into the Tecastus public server, which will be linked in the description. So that's basically the cube, and that will cover most of the other objects as well. Before we move on, there's also this materials tab, which allows you to apply a material to your object beforehand. If you want to do that, like apply a stone material or your own kind of test material, like a hex grid or something like that, perhaps. And that is it. We'll now jump to the top. I'm going to just do some random settings that I don't really care about too much, but I'm going to place that down. And then we'll look at the output type, which I mentioned at the start. We'll come back to because it's a very cool little tool. By default, it's on static mesh, which is, as it says, a static mesh that comes with collision and such. Then if we were to hit this drop down, we see that we have other options such as dynamic mesh and volume. Now, unless you know that you need a dynamic mesh, I would say don't worry about it too much. But the volume one is quite a cool one. Uh, Basically, you can choose what kind of volume it is, and you won't see any visual difference, I believe, until you accept it, and then this will be turned into a volume. Now, with a box, you could probably find it elsewhere, by looking for one and dragging it in. But as we move through these different tools, you can start to get some interesting shapes to utilize as volumes instead of static meshes. So for now, I'm going to just delete that because we don't need it. The cylinder tool is very much like the cube tool, except this just gives us a radius option, a height option, the amount of slices in the radial shape, I guess. I don't know what the terminology would be for that. But the radial slices, if we go right down to 3, it becomes a triangular shape. And as we keep increasing them, we cycle through all of these different stages until it becomes a cylinder, a seemingly perfect cylinder. So that through this tool, you're able to get quite a lot of shapes. And you can imagine that, if you need an octagon or a pentagram, pentagon, not a pentagram, you can basically achieve those different shapes through the cylinder tool. We're going to keep it as default. Height subdivisions is another one of these ones where you can't see it unless you are in something like wireframe mode. And the height subdivisions is just how much detail is in the upper axis or the Z axis of the object. And then again, it's this polygroup mode, which is related to other tools, which we are not covering at the moment. So output type, again, you can do that with any of these shapes that I'm about to show. So you can have a static, dynamic, or a volume, by creating these. So there we go, we have the cylinder. I'm just going to plop a box down there just because we've made it, and we're just going to run through them. So the next one on our list is the sphere. No, the Taurus. The best way to describe what these are, because sometimes, for some people it can kind of, it makes total sense. Some people, they might find it a bit more difficult to kind of just grasp it, like I did. It took me a while to actually even figure it out. But the major radius is essentially the entire loop that makes up the torus. That's the way to think of it. So this is the scale of the radius basically for the entire loop. The minor radius is essentially the radius that makes up the thickness of the torus. So the radius of the actual I wouldn't say width because it's not the width of the shape, but you know what I mean. Where I'm kind of circling with the mouse, you can kind of get an idea for what I mean. The best way to visualize it is by taking the major and minor slices right down to their lowest possible settings, which gives you this triangular torus. And if we use the minor slices and we increase and decrease them, you can see that it's changing the slices that make up the minor radius. So if we put that back to default and then we play with the major slices, you can see that this is the amount of slices that makes up the entire loop, which is the major radius. So there we have the torus. So I'm going to just place that one there. I'm going to go down to the rectangle next. This is a pretty simple one, quite difficult to see in every scenario, especially on here because it is flat. It's a plane essentially. So yeah, this is a plane tool that we can place. Obviously, if we have it set to align to normal, then it kind of follows like we said earlier. But yeah, what I'm going to do is maybe go for a 500 by 500 plane. And I'm just going to put that on top of our cube. And then all of these settings are essentially the same as any of the others. And don't really need to worry about it, most of the settings, until you change to rounded rectangle. You get a few extra options with such things as the corner radius, which is like how the bevel is, the amount of slices in them. So that's that for the rectangle tool. So I'm going to leave that one there. Obviously you have to think about the normals. The normals don't actually, it's not two-sided because it is a plane, so you have to remember that. Now I'm going to go with the last shape on the left side. We have the stairs tool. As you can see, I've already done some here for my little scene, but I will show you. We'll probably have to reset these back to default. Again, the positioning is exactly the same and the output is exactly the same. And we have a few options here. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to put these in the environment and turn these by -90 so that they're facing us. And we can play around with the settings. I will use the show gizmo tick box and uncheck it so that I can see the stairs more clearly. And here we can see that we have general settings. The drop down is allowing you to change the stair type. We have linear, which is the one we have selected. We have floating, which takes away the bottom support, makes it less blocky, so we have floating stairs. We have curved, which is essentially like a kind of, almost like a spiral, the start of a spiral, used probably inside like castle towers and stuff like that. And then we have a proper spiral, which is essentially a floating curved stairway. So I'm going to stick with linear and allow you to explore those options. But then we have the options for things like the amount of steps in the object, the width of them, the height of the steps themselves. I find really it's better to keep very near or go slightly larger than the official one. But if you make alterations to height, you need to really match it with the alterations to depth to make them feel a bit unstretched. So that's those options. If you want to allow these options to become usable, that's basically changing the stair type not to floating or linear but to curved or spiral, depending on whether or not you obviously depends on what your scenario is, but you know, it will match to what one you choose. The angle is what I'm talking about, so you can do a full 360, which probably isn't what you'd be using with curved, but you might get away with that with spiral stairs. If you know, was to alter your height. And obviously I've made a terrible error here um, in my settings, so I'm going to just try and do something a bit more impressive looking. Okay, I'm not doing that very well. Let's go for 10. It's not enough. Let's go for 20. Let's go for 15. Okay, that'll be fine. Then let's go for 200 width on the stairs. Okay, there we go. A rough go at doing some spiral stairs. So we have done the stair, box, cylinder, torus, rectangle and stairs. We now move to the right side and do these 4 before moving on to the more complicated tools. Sphere is a pretty simple one again, probably one of the ones you can just really explore yourself, but I thought I might as well show you. So sphere comes with a different type of subdivision. So if we was to go into wireframe, I'm sure that that is allowing you to see it. Lat long is going to be probably a little bit less dense, and your box subdivision type will have higher detail. We have then the detail of the subdivisions, which I'm sure you could work out from older other things. You know, you can bring it all the way down to a cube if you want. If you change the subdivision type to lat longitude, it gives you the horizontal and vertical slices, so you can change detail based upon that, which can give you some interesting shapes depending on your needs. But I'm just going to stick with a nice, clean, standard sphere. Everything else is essentially the same, so you can make it into a volume, etc. So let's move on from the sphere. We then have the cone tool, which is, as it says, a cone shape where we can control the radius, the height, the slices that make up the radius or the radial slices, and then we have height subdivision, which again would require wireframe mode to get a nice easy visualization of this. If you lower these too much, you end up with a pyramid essentially, which might be something that you need. So you can make pyramids pretty quickly. As you can see, the normals are not very good, or the shader, but this can be altered later on in the UV editor, which we'll get to later. So perhaps I'll leave this as a pyramid instead of a cone and see if we can fix it later on with the UVs. Okay, so I'm going to accept that. The next one is the arrow tool. As you can see, I've been playing with that one before. We plop an arrow down, we can see, for some reason I've got something selected, so I'm just going to quickly go cancel that and whack a new arrow down. So this one, we have the shaft radius, shaft height, we have the head radius, and the head height. So you can already see that you can maybe start to make some pretty obvious shapes with these things, even out of the box. Maybe I could make a, you know, an umbrella or some kind of lamp or at least the start for a lamp. It's not just an arrow. Um, yeah, and it's just another way of making different shapes. Maybe you could make uh, wheels, I guess. Not wheels, but um, like axles, perhaps. I don't know. You got the option to do radial slices and head um, subdivisions and such, so you can create some different interesting shapes. I am going to go for some kind of umbrella-y lamp thing. Maybe do head radius increase for some extra shade. Alright, moving on, we have the disc, which is basically similar to if I just put it here, similar to the plane or rectangle tool, where we can create a disc plane, choose the radial, so we can go all the way down to a triangle, pentagon, hexagon, octagon, all these different types of shapes in between. So yeah, we have radial slices, radial subdivisions, which are the geometry that make up each of all of the detail, which you would have to visualize in wireframe mode to see those. Quite mesmerizing. And then I skipped it, but we'll return to it. We have the disk type. And basically, if we choose punctured disk, we can create a disk with a hole in it, which might be quite handy depending on your use case. Maybe you want to create like a shaft or like a tube with a shaft down it, and this is the walkway. Perhaps that's what you need. So let's maybe put this on top of the Taurus, so you can see, we'll get an idea of what it might be used for. So that is the basic tools or shapes. I think I will move on to another video, because even though these are super simple shapes, this video is already starting to go on. So that is basic shapes. We will now move on to more advanced tools within the Create tab, which will be Extrude Polygon, Revolve Path, Draw Spline, Cube Grid, Extrude Path. I think I said the wrong things there, but basically all of these tools. Catch you in the next video. And also, if you could please jump over and follow the Tecastus Studios YouTube channel, that would also be greatly appreciated, so that you can keep up to date with the other project that I'll be going deep into pretty soon, and I'm sure you'll love it.